Well, welcome everyone. This is the first of an initial four-part, and then we have an additional fifth part that's going to come in later on. So this is an ecological series. I can't believe it's taken us this long to do this because we think about it all the time, and it's sort of one of our chief issues. So I'm going to light the chalice with some simple words. And I'm just going to make up. Let's find a little stillness here. One of the challenges and opportunities and sources of meaning any of us can have in this moment in history is to be an advocate for the planet and its long-term well-being. It is, to even just say that, you can feel the impact of how important this is. It will coincide with other issues, but every other issue relates to this one in a kind of unique way. And so this is a small drop in the bucket. Today we start off with Susan Deo, who I'm going to introduce in a second, but this is the first group. Susan's going to bring us she's going to bring us kind of a comprehensive view of where humanity is in many ways. A lot of the NGOs working around the planet, we're all familiar with the climate change conferences that take place periodically, the last one being in Copenhagen. Susan's going to give us a little bit of a history of where we're at right now. She's titled her piece, Hope in a Time of Climate Change. And I think that the interesting thing about environment, I don't know why I'm so choked up, because I get choked up about this. It's important to me. And we're in a beautiful space, and we've surrounded ourselves here with a little bit of botany just to set the scene. And we obviously have a beautiful campus. For anyone who's watching who hasn't been here, it's really just a gorgeous setting. We're have a canyon, and it's flora and fauna, and it's California, and it's beautiful. And it's all true. Everything we look at is attractive, but everything in the world is not necessarily attractive. And even in America, where we can brag about some of the progress we've made, we have exported a lot of our ecological sins, you might say, in terms of industry and stuff. So things, even for us, can feel a little cleaner than they really are in terms of our lifestyles. So this is an overview of Susan's going to be hopeful and spiritual, and she's going to bring us a sense of what's going on and the progress moving forward in a way that I think will be buoyant for all of us. Next week, I'm going to talk about a little bit of history of how humans have related to the planet, kind of give us a little bit of religious history. Obviously, indigenous people have a much more natural relationship to the environment. There's been an evolving concern that our kids are sort of nature deprived or nature deficient. I'm going to talk philosophically about how our relationship to the planet has been and evolved over time. Sort of a philosophical journey of how we relate to our ecology. And that's going to be followed up by Rachel Brunke, who's an activist. As we know, Rachel's a member of our church. Rachel and I are sort of separately but together kind of conspiring to talk a little bit about green death and how there's been a movement to make more organic the burial process. It has a lot of presently, in its present incarnation, has a lot of formaldehyde and a lot of sort of preservation things that are really destructive. And this is obviously one small little area of ecology. And then we're going to take a break because we're at camp, and we're not going to hold an event then. And then the following week on the 18th, Naresh, who's Susan's husband and one of our chief cooks, is going to provide us with a view of how technology, I think particularly as it relates to satellites and measurements of the planet, are coming into effect and give us guides for how and where environmental destruction can be prevented. A very kind of smart look, adding technology to the piece of the puzzle in the combination that we need to. So we welcome all the folks here. We got about 10 or 15 people here. We're grateful for all those people watching at home, like Susan and Pat. So Susan is, we know Susan as the lovely wife of Naresh, who's a member here. Susan's a member of the Methodist Church in town. More importantly for us, she has a master's in environmental education. She has a second master's in agricultural economics. She has taught at Antioch University here in LA for about 16 years. She's a docent at the PV Interpretive Center. So clearly incredibly unqualified to be in front of us today. So we welcome Susan, who's a lovely person. And I think for me, the most heartening thing about it, I know how passionate a citizen she is. In addition to these professional skills, she cares and she acts. She writes a piece for the nature piece, obviously for the Sierra Club on the news, and just we might show a TED Talk after if we have time. We'll see how the questions go later on, but I'd like to invite Susan up, and she's all mic'd up and she's ready to go. And we're gonna have a little question and answer time after, and I can pass the microphone around. Susan, thank you. Yeah, give her a round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Is that working now, the microphone?
I think you're good.
Okay, okay.
No, let's turn you on.
It went off?
I don't know.
I guess it did.
It did. You were but silenced. Yeah.
Now it's working, yes. And I was trying to be so quiet sitting over there because I was afraid I would be on speaker. I'll leave it here. That way it can't get affected by my.
Great.
So years ago, my daughters had a Native American artist in residence at their elementary school. I had the honor of participating in some of the programs she and her daughter presented, including a field trip to their camp where we hiked in the woods and sat in a circle in their huge teepee. It was huge. It held 2 classes worth of kids. At one point on our nature hike, Black Snake Woman asked everyone to sit so that she could demonstrate something to us in the woods. The children scrambled around to find a rock or a log to sit on, and she shook her head. No, children, sit on the earth. We must remember to be in touch with our mother. And that has stuck with me like 30 plus years. I keep remembering that, and it's really important. We sometimes forget it, especially in our helter-skelter busy lives. Let's begin then by thinking back to a favorite experience that you had in nature, a time you felt close to the roots of who you are as a human being, a true sense of communing with the natural world. Perhaps it was a walk along the seashore, smelling the salty air, lulled by the sound of the waves breaking and receding, or maybe sitting in the cool shade of a tree in your yard, or after a long hike in the woods. Perhaps lying on the grass on a peaceful afternoon, watching the clouds drift by overhead while a hawk calls out in the sky. Or maybe it was an encounter with a whale in Baja, the thrill of touching her back or looking deep into her eye. So if everybody would close your eyes, please, and transport yourself back to that moment, conjure up that memory with all your senses. I'm going to read a little poem, so feel free to leave your eyes shut if you want to. The world is too much with us late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. The sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. You can open your eyes now if you want, or not. I think all of us can identify with these feelings. The ideas are not new. These words were written by William Wordsworth in 1802. But the sense of impending doom looms much larger to us these 200 plus years later. The damage we humans have done to our beautiful planet since that time would likely be inconceivable to Mr. Wordsworth. We compose poems and songs, books and movies, and create art about it as well. Today, we call it eco-grief or climate anxiety. As Jane Goodall says in her new book, The Book of Hope, a survival guide for trying times, written with Douglas Abrams, I guess the depth of our grief is a reminder of the depth of our love. I think I can safely say that those of us participating today have a ferocious love for this beautiful planet, for all beings who dwell here, that we hope for a life-giving future for each and every one. We are in dire circumstances. In commenting on the August Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Work Group #1 report, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "This is a code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening and the evidence is irrefutable." At the release of the IPCC's second work group report last month, he added, "We are on a fast track to climate disaster." In 2020, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that's our US organization, reported that the Earth's combined ocean and land temperature has increased on an average of 0.13 degrees Fahrenheit per decade since 1880. But the average rate of increase in the last decades since 1981 has been 0.32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is more than twice the rate that it has been since 1880. For each of the 5 years between 2015 and 2019, pollution caused 1 in 6 deaths globally. 1 in 6, 9 million people died from poor air quality, unsafe water, toxic chemical pollution. And 90% of those deaths, kind of along what Steve was saying too, happened in low and middle income countries, places farther away from us where we don't see it so much. Half of all the plastics ever manufactured have been made in the last 15 years. 8 million pieces of plastic pollution find their way into our oceans every day. And 79% of plastic waste ends up in landfills, while only 9% is recycled. Wildfires, storms, hurricanes, droughts, and floods have all been supersized. And then there's COVID-19 pandemic. As Catherine Hayhoe writes in her essay, How to Talk About Climate Change, in the book, All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. And there is a link and a list of all these bibliographic things I mentioned in the chat so that you can find it if you want to look at anything in the future. Here's what she says. We care about climate change because it already affects everything that's at the top of our priority list. Our health, our families, our jobs and the economy, the well-being of our communities, and those less fortunate than us who live in them. But today, I'd like to kind of turn this on its head and talk about what a wonderful thing it is to be alive at this moment in time. We can be the generation that sets things right. It's up to us, individuals, families, cities, and regional bodies, states, nations, and indeed everyone on the planet. So let's talk about some of the things we can do if we truly focus on the future. And I don't mean fantasize about the future like a sci-fi movie, because that's big dreams for fun and entertainment, or dwell on the future, which is focus on the bad stuff. What I'm talking about is hope. Envision the future while recognizing that the inevitability of challenges that we face with it. Actually, there's a science of hope. It's a relatively new one. Hope is how we create new facts, Jane Goodall says in the same book, which is in the reference there. Hope is a way of engaging with problems, not avoiding them. It involves action. It creates a feedback mechanism. You hope for specific things in a better future and engage in action to help make those happen, which increases your hope for the future and inspires you to participate in further action, and so on. Hopeful people aren't all pie in the sky dreamers either. In fact, they actually anticipate setbacks along the way and work to remove them. I like to share Jane's reasons for hopes with my college students when I was teaching. She's talked about these and used them in articles for many years, and there are 4 of them. And she continues, even though she's almost 90 years old, she continues to believe in these as hope for the future. She believes in the amazing intellect of humans. And she puts a caveat on that. She doesn't mean we're intelligent, she said. We often make a lot of mistakes, but we have the capability of doing some wonderful things. She believes in the resilience of nature. She believes in the power of youth. And I think we've especially seen that in the last couple of years again. And she believes in the indomitable human spirit. So what I'd like to do is to share some things from a grand perspective, from the international to the local to the non-governmental or nonprofit organizations, some of the things that are happening today that give me hope. And like I say, this is just a smattering. You probably have a lot more examples. So these are reasons why I'm hopeful and why I keep engaging in this work. And I hope you will find something to latch onto yourselves, because the world needs all of us. It's not just when thousands engage in climate justice action perfectly, but rather when millions do the best they can. Let's start with the big picture, the global initiative. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a real mouthful, under the auspices of the United Nations, is responsible for advancing knowledge on human-induced climate change. We're all aware of the Paris Climate Agreement and the COP26, which was the meeting of all the parties to that agreement that was held in Glasgow last year, representatives around the world. But did you know there is also a partner agreement, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which also the same nations have signed, and we've actually signed on to it ourselves now. The CBD, as it's known, Convention on Biological Diversity, has 3 national level obligations to conserve and sustainably use biological diversity and to share its benefits. Out of this has grown an international movement called 30 by 30. And the 30 by 30 movement means that the goal for the world is to preserve 30% of the land and sea environments by 2030. So over 100 nations have signed on to both of those, to that 30 by 30 agreement, including the US. Investing in nature this decade, in the 2020s, can provide up to 1/3 of the carbon sequestration and reduction that we need for combating climate change. So do you see how it's like 2 things? We're working to reduce what's in the environment, and then by improving local habitats, we can take more of the carbon out also. So those things together are really important. And shortly after his inauguration, President Biden signed an executive order called America the Beautiful to restore, connect, and conserve 30% of our land and waters by 2030. This is meant to be a locally led and voluntary action with lots of projects all over the country, a nationwide effort to conserve, connect, and restore the lands and waters and wildlife upon which we depend. Now, it's really also very forward-thinking for this time and something that we think about or we've heard about type of things. Included in this, some of the key principles are pursuing a collaborative and inclusive approach to conservation so that everybody's involved, all the stakeholders. Conserving lands and waters for the benefit of all people and supporting locally led and locally designed efforts. Also, honoring tribal sovereignty and supporting the priorities of tribal nations. Pursuing conservation and restoration approaches that create jobs and support healthy communities. Honoring private property rights and involving landowners in this. Using science as a guide, building on existing tools and strategies. I attended one of the advantages of, or one of the good things I think that has come out of our pandemic times is you can attend a lot more large scale conferences and workshops online than you could ever do before, because you had to drive like to Sacramento or fly to Glasgow to participate in things. But there have been things going on all over the world, and I've tapped into some of them, and it's been really wonderful. For example, regarding this, there's a lot of action groups in California, because California also has a 30 by 30 plan. It was the first state to institute one. And this one meeting that I attended had people from lots of different groups around the country and the state and what they are doing. There was one in Hawaii, there were the tribal people in California, there were several other different groups around the country, as well as within California. So buy-in from all stakeholders is built into these programs: local citizens, businesses, governments, and tribal nations. The hope is that the momentum and local support of projects will help keep them going, even if there's a change in the federal administration. So if it's a local thing that got started and there's people really involved in it, it won't matter who the federal government, who's in charge at that point in time. And currently California has conserved land somewhere over 23%, and coastal oceans somewhere around 16%. So we have a ways to go in those two places. But it's exciting to think that with California being the first state, and California is so big that when we do things like that, we can influence a lot of other things happening in the country, because we're so many people here. So not only are we collectively trying to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we're releasing into the atmosphere, but we're also trying to increase the abundance of healthy natural ecosystems, which are the best proven way of sequestering these greenhouse gases within plant material, soils, and ocean waters. Kelp and trees are wonderful at sequestering carbon. One exciting announcement also made recently in California was the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary is now up for public comment with the National Marine Sanctuaries at NOAA. This is separate from California's 30 by 30, but it provides a wonderful example of ways that tribal nations can be involved and share their understanding of preserving and protecting natural areas and their heritage. And there's a link to show you where the map is. It's basically from Point Conception all the way up to near Monterey. It's a really large area. There's a good map of it online. And what that public comment means is it's been approved to go to this stage. So you can go on the federal government website and you can make a comment, say, yeah, I like this idea or something like that. But there's one link that'll take you right to the Chumash website that tells you more about how it was developed and everything. Yes?
What impact would that have for oil?
Yeah, it would preserve another whole area of coastline as a marine sanctuary, but it also preserves some of their historical heritage, because there's a lot of historical area in that place too. So it gets us higher on the 13% of ocean waters. It would bring us up a little higher too, even though it's, it was already well in process for many years before the 30 by California signed on to 30 by 30, but it gives you an idea of how all these things kind of can fit together. And I'll talk about some other ways that we can also fit together with that type of thing too. So non-governmental organizations, which they're known of worldwide, but we call them here in the US nonprofit organizations, are harnessing their expertise to collaborate with each other, with scientists, with local activists, and citizens to undertake some exciting projects. Here are some examples I'm going to share with you of these nonprofits, some of them and their work. And please, I apologize, I've not included nearly all the ones that are doing all these works. I found this one just recently. There's a new collaborative, because organizations, and not just the non-governmental organizations, but governments and local business groups and so on, are starting to form a lot of collaborations, which is really the only way we're going to get anything done. So there's a collaboration now between the Nature Conservancy, the the World Wildlife Fund, the Pew Charitable Trust, and a group called Zoma Lab, which I've never heard of before. And they've recently announced a project they're calling Enduring Earth. It's a joint effort to protect 20 large, important global habitats around the world and effectively tackle climate change and biodiversity loss in those areas. They plan to raise $4 billion for these major conservation projects, and they just started listing them. So there's also a link there that talks about that, so you can go and look and see what type of things they're working on. The Nature Conservancy in California also has, as well as many other nonprofits, have been hosting informative and inspiring workshops and conferences the last few years. So I was talking with you about one of the ones that I went to. TNC, as they're known, the Nature Conservancy, also researches and advocates for the greening of cities to bring nature closer to where the population is, and in many ways underserved population. We all have read about how Los Angeles is kind of a park desert. We don't have enough parks for people within walking distance of where the population lives in LA. And they've created other creative, innovative collaborations. Like I just recently read that they're working with the rice farmers in Central California. And what they did was they helped adjust the timing of when they drain the rice paddies so that they stay marshland for a little longer for the fall bird migration, to give the birds a place to find food and rest and get water. So these are types of things that can be done if you think a little bit outside the box. And Nature Conservancy is one of those groups that's starting to do that, I think. Youth action groups like the Sunshine Movement and Jane Goodall's group that are called Roots and Shoots, they're all over the world, also demonstrate the promise of getting our youth inspired and involved in all those interrelated problems, people, animals, the environment. And she talks more about it in the Book of Hope that I mentioned, as well as she talks about it a lot when she gives lectures and so on around the world. The National Audubon Society has an online database of native plants for your region that support local birds, an opportunity for you to search for flowers and trees that would be helpful to the birds in your region. National Wildlife Federation also has something like that for insects. They haven't got to California yet, but they've got a lot of the East Coast. You can put your zip code in and find wildflowers that would be good for your area. Audubon has also created a number of scientific and action reports, including Survival by Degrees, 389 bird species on the brink, the impact of climate change on these North American birds, the future of birds in our national parks, how climate change will affect birds in our country's most treasured national places, and another report indicating that habitats important for birds are also critical to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, kind of that 30 by 30 idea. Environmental action groups like 350.org and Third Act offer positive, effective action steps you can take to combat climate change, depending on your interest and time. I've also attended some online conferences and workshops through these organizations and been inspired by people around the world who are doing good work. 350.org held one for Earth Day last year, and they had youth action groups and others from all over the world participating in this. And they had artwork and dances and music, as well as it was really inspiring to hear what people are doing in many parts of the world. 350.org is a climate justice movement that was started in 2008. 350 parts per million is the safe level of carbon in the atmosphere. That's where their name comes from. Third Act is a new organization. It's an advocacy group for experienced Americans, people over 60. It's organized in this way to have the backs of the youth, taking the experience and the financial wherewithal and the time that people have when they get in their third act. That's where the name comes from. to have the backs of those youth advocates. The interesting thing about those two organizations, one of the people that founded 350.org is also one of the people that founded Third Act, Bill McKibben. Yeah. They have working groups and interest groups that you can join. You can participate in their upbeat monthly online gatherings where I always smile when I'm done with it. I just feel much better, the type of things. One of the projects that they're working on is climate change is one of their focuses, and the other one is the strengthening our right to vote. So they're kind of working in those two things. But they have a program called Banking on Our Future. And they're working to get people to sign on to pledge to take out their accounts and their credit cards from the major banks if the major banks don't stop funding fossil fuel companies. So you can read about that on their website if it's something that's of interest to you. They also had a workshop, which I wasn't able to attend, on how to actually go talk to your local bank manager if you wanted to do that aspect of it. And they gave this little workshop on what to say and how to approach the bank manager and tell them your thoughts. Another organization, the Ocean Conservancy, supports the science and advocacy around preserving ocean species and ecosystems. For example, they're presenting policies and innovations to get plastic out of our oceans. Then started in California, the Sierra Club, which started in California, is also quite involved in advocacy work, both locally and nationally, and is participating as well in the development of the California's 30 by 30, thinking about what further areas they'd like to actually add to that to reach that 30%. Another organization, and I think Naresh might be talking a little bit about some of their work later when he gives his talk, is the Environmental Defense Fund. And they work with scientists, economists, lawyers, building partnerships and shaping policy around the world. The research led by the Environmental Defense Fund Climate scientists published in the spring of 2020 showed that using existing technologies, concerted global action could cut methane pollution by half by 2030 and slow the rate of global warming by as much as 30%. Methane's atmospheric warming capability, it's 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide. And once the emissions of methane are cut, it also has the advantage that it disappears from the atmosphere, whereas carbon dioxide can stay for tens of years. I think I lost it again. Okay. Is it working again now?
Yeah.
There, okay, yeah. So it can cut much faster. So if we work with methane, we're finding we can reduce the problem with global greenhouse gases much quicker. So another tool that Environmental Defense Fund is collaborating with other organizations to do is to create, it did it again, has got the battery dying maybe? I'll just choose that.
Work with this and
Mhm.
put that in your pocket. I'll get you.
Okay. It's on now, right? Okay. So they're working with other organizations to develop Methane Sat, which is a satellite that's going to launch in 2023 that will be able to measure the leaks of methane around the world. It's one of the things that's hard to tell where it's coming from. So this will help them see where it is. And the other interesting thing about it is as they talk with corporations and so on, they realize that, like even the gas companies realize that if they could contain their leaks, they would be saving a lot of money too. And the technology already exists for in the interim until we don't use fossil fuels anymore to at least cut down the amount of methane that's getting into the atmosphere. And there's also an organization that Environmental Defense Fund helped establish, which is called the International Leaf Coalition. LEAF is the initials. And what they do is they're mobilizing public and private money to stop deforestation and restore degraded tropical forests, large scale, with whole countries and large jurisdictions. And they also are assisting in standardizing and certifying the effectiveness of carbon offsets. Like if you buy a plane ticket, you can say, oh yes, I want to put some of this money to go toward a carbon offset. Well, it's not just, oh, whatever, it's real serious certified carbon offsets. They will only do that type of work. Corporations want to make sure that when they put money toward it, it's actually going toward that function. So there are special consulting groups that work on determining the best places to find real carbon offsets too. So corporations are getting involved. As one person said a while ago, there's no business to be done on a dead planet. So here are a few examples that I recently heard about. Patagonia recognizes the threat of climate change and is working to get the oil out of their clothing, make products based on environmental profit and loss, like, is this product worth the cost, or should we not make this product anymore? And clean up every part of their business. Netflix is pledging to optimize, electrify, and decarbonize as many of their inputs as they can, from filming productions to transportation. For example, LED lighting is now used, and it not only helps the environment, but it saves their costs. And on filming productions, they've started using electric batteries instead of diesel, because they often have to have their own power if they're out on location filming. And again, it saves them a lot of money as well as making everything greener. And Netflix is also investing in 17 projects around the world for adding habitat. Another corporation, Intel, is working toward being net zero carbon neutral by 2040. So companies are seeing the writing on the wall that they do have to be involved too. And on a more individual level, I'm really excited by an idea of what Professor Douglas Ptolemy is calling Homegrown National Park.
Oh.
He, in his book, Nature's Best Hope, which is also on the category, on the biography, biography, a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. In his book and on his Instagram feed, Ptolemy encourages the planting of local native trees and plants to encourage the return of local insects and birds. Many plants host specific butterflies or bees or other insects, and returning those plants to their local habitats brings back the insects. And he's found it to happen. He's brought back the caterpillars, especially, are really a boon for birds. They have a lot of calories for one little creature. So he's found that in his yard in Virginia, that he's gotten a lot of birds and butterflies back by adding the plants that were originally there. So he figures that if we reduce lawn by half, because a lawn is not a very good ecosystem, if people around the country reduce lawn by half and remove invasive species and plant keystone plant genera that belong in your own community, again, places like Audubon and National Wildlife Foundation, and in California, the California Native Plant Society have keys to those type of things that you can look up. If you plant those, he estimated that if half America's lawns were allowed to return to their natural state, we could end up with 20 million acres of park. And that would be an area larger than the Everglades, Yosemite, Yellowstone, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands, Olympic, Sequoia, Grand Canyon, Denali, and the Great Smoky Mountains. And if we include things like the parkways along highways and along our streets, if we include the edges of croplands in the Midwest and let them revert to more native habitat, we would go a long way to improving what we have. He says, Professor Ptolemy, nature has proven to be more resilient more malleable, and more forgiving than I ever thought she could be. But she is growing increasingly impatient. I can only hope that she is willing to give us one more chance. Let's renature our surrounds. Or another person in Canada whose name is Diana Beresford Kroger. She is an Irish botanist who now lives on a forest that she created in Canada and has made it part of her life's work to research and preserve heritage tree species of the Canadian boreal forest. She's found them to be more genetically resilient for climate change. So she advocates on behalf of an ambitious goal to global bioplan that encourages ordinary people to develop a new relationship with nature. She believes if every person planted one tree every year for 6 years, we could go a long way to restoring the global forest and reducing our carbon footprint. So the brilliance of harnessing nature to combat climate change shows our humility too. We can't do it better than Mother Nature. For years, we've been mining carbon from the ground by extracting fossil fuels and burning them, adding carbon sequestered for millennia into the atmosphere. Nearly 1/3 of the excess carbon in the atmosphere is from removing plants and trees around the world and releasing the carbon they once stored in their structure and in the soil. Let's restore more of our forests, grasslands, and wetlands to their former functioning ecosystems. California's lost like 90% of its wetlands. Speaking of which, consider an ecologist who studied and restored a Spanish wetland so effectively that the water entering it from the river above, not only does the wetland support a thriving, healthy fishery used by the local people, but when the water is out at the end and pours into the Mediterranean, it's cleaner than the water that came in. And not only does it support people for fishing, but also there are tons of shorebirds that come and eat in this wetland also. So we can do it where we can support all of nature, not just us. Households can also be a key for change. They're one of the most powerful decision-making units we have, and they account for 42% of the emissions. So five major things determine your household's impact, aside from where you live, because living in the US, we always have a higher rate of footprint than we do if we lived in a smaller country that had less accoutrements or whatever. What you drive, whether you have solar energy or not in your home, how you heat your water, what heats your home, and where you purchase your electricity. So all of those things can have an effect. And one of the nice things that one Nature Conservancy scientist said was, we have all the solutions. We just need the political will. We do need policy because we can't do it alone. Individuals can't solve this alone in little patches here and there all around the world. We need the government to be involved, local, state, national, and global. But the politicians aren't going to lead. It's the people who must lead. Remember Margaret Mead's words? Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. On the first Earth Day in 1970, 20 million people marched in the United States. That was 10% of the country's population then. It was the beginning of the environmental activism, and it ushered in an era of political will to help fight pollution. That's where the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency came from. So harness your indomitable human spirit, because millions of our ethical choices will move us toward a more sustainable world. In the words of Janine Marie Hagen, in our time of disturbance and radical change, we are crossing a threshold, a portal, or an unseen bridge from one world to another. It could be said that the bridge is either collapsing beneath us or is being made as we walk together. in the long twilight hours when one civilization gives way to another. Take time to grieve, but don't despair. Find kindred spirits and organizations, have forward-thinking actions, gather new perspectives. Roll up your sleeves. Everyone has a role to play. Green your household more, sign petitions, write letters, march, volunteer for a Get Out the Vote campaign, plant a tree or build a native plant garden in your community. And remember to vote. As Emily Johnston writes in her essay, Loving a Vanishing World, in the book All We Can Save, the world needs you, and it needs you right now, because anything that we do this year or next is worth 10 of the same thing 10 years from now. Nothing has ever been more important. We have been granted an astonishingly beautiful gift that has never before been given to humans, the chance to shepherd human and animal life into the coming centuries and millennia. That's a power that should make us very humble, and a privilege that should motivate us profoundly. So pick your passions, learn all you can, and remember that talking about climate change is important too. Catherine Hayhoe again. If we don't talk about why it matters, why would we care about the problem itself? And if we don't talk about what we can do to fix it, why would we take action or expect our community, our state, and our country to do so either? Together we can, together we must, together we will. Everybody repeat after me. Together we can, together we must, together we will. Thank you.
Good. Any questions?
The name of the book, Goodall book or Western book?
The book, it's on the reference list there. I called The Book of Hope, a survival guide for trying times. Okay.
Anything else? I was very inspired. I mean, I've been sort of passive about the environment for a little bit now. I mean, it's one of my inspired. Good. And this whole thing will hopefully work. Question? Oh, you know. Yeah. Stephen asked about what Jane Goodall was, and the name of it again was.
The name is The Book of Hope, a survival guide for trying times. And she wrote it with Douglas Abrams, who also wrote another one with Dalai Lama. It's in a series. It's very good.
The idea of what that other 30 is.
The other 30 is 30% of the land and waters preserved around the world. 30%, if we reach the total of 30% altogether, not more, but 30% if we can preserve it. The real goal is to get to 50, but they're trying to get, they're trying to make it a little more realistic by going to 30 these 10 years. And again, all of these things are here. Kelly has put it in the chat on Zoom, or if you want, we can send you a link to the bibliography. I was trying to conserve paper by not printing it out.
I thank you so much, Susan. That's wonderful. Oh, thank you. In your marvelous organizations and NGOs and all that thing, I hear very little about regenerative agriculture. I hear very little about, returning prairies in the Midwest where we've mined and it's involved with sequestration, because I think that it's very difficult with the agricultural.
Right.
So I just wondered if you might address that in some way.
Yes, there are. In fact, it is another project that several of the organizations are working on. In fact, There's a lot of research being done at our old university, University of Illinois. A lot of the Midwestern universities are working a lot with how do we return, how do we make use, like one of the things that's happened in the Midwest is with the larger farms, they've removed all there used to be we used to call it the ditch, which was the roadside between the road and the field. And that always had nice native plants and all kinds of creatures. Well, now the farm fields go right up to the road. So they lost all that bit of land that could have been added to the Homegrown National Park, for example. And also working with the idea that if you have a fallow field that doesn't have anything in it, you need to have some kind of a cover crop to keep the soil and the nutrients from washing away. Yeah. I'm sorry I left that out. Being a farm girl, I shouldn't have left it. It was in there. Some of the yes, I am. I grew up on a farm in the Midwest. So yes, there is work being done on that. And that because all the major rivers in the world also have dead zones at the end of them. Like the Mississippi, there's a huge dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's from all the too much nutrients that are washing down.
Thank you so much. I really. Rats.
Mhm.
And I was thinking of showing this. Show some kind of a presentation about the environment, as a kind of a fun party kind of thing, and start getting people educated and enthusiastic in the environment in our community.
Something that you might do, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Doug Ptolemy, who wrote that book, Nature's Best Hope, has done lots of YouTube talks. In fact, that's how I first heard him, was through the Land Conservancy here. He did a talk about, and he talks in his book too about, well, how do you convince, how did he convince his neighbors that it was all right for him to turn his lawn into what looks like kind of unkept wild thing. Yeah. And in California, it's even more so that way because native plants look like they're dead when they're, but they're not. Yeah.
We want everything pretty.
Right, right.
But if all that information.
Yeah, yeah. Right. But see, like we said,
We'll get
Kelly has a link to this, so you can get the whole bibliography. Like I said, I just didn't want to use paper to make copies of it, but yeah. Yes.
You're a resource. I'm so glad you have that delightful dog I get.
Thanks, Mary.
Two questions. Will your talk be accessible to people?
I would ask Stephen and Kelly about that, if that's possible or not.
Repeat that question.
Did you record it so other people could see it later on?
This is live on Facebook, so that does record.
Okay.
How would we reach that?
The PUC Facebook page, and then we could click on that and see today's talk. Yeah, and if you want to be your email, send you a link to it. Great, thank you. The other question.
Yes, it's one of, yeah, I do. That's another, I kind of left it out because it's another organization that I'm aware of the work they do. And they do a lot of work more on the legal side and the advocacy side, trying to sue the government with not just by themselves, but I think you could say they started because a forest or a bear could not sue the government if somebody was interfering with their habitat. So they decided that maybe somebody needed to speak for nature, and that's where they started. So they do a lot of things legally and policy related and advocacy related in that regard. And it's another organization. I think I did not put it on here, but it could go on here too.
I like to always reevaluate where my money goes.
Exactly.
That's the reason I asked that
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would say study their website because you can see some of the things they do.
Thank you, Susan.
Sure.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
We're starting more and more to the elementary level and middle school level and these issues. And since the late, I think, 1990s, has there been any follow-up to understand what impact that might
The main impact that there's two things. The first one is that, remember we were talking about kind of park deserts in LA. Well, one of the things that the docents at Point Vicente do is bring a lot of kids, we get funding to bring kids who not even see the ocean that live in other parts of LA. And there's a lot of work that's been done. In fact, one of the books on here doesn't talk about him, but Richard Louv has written a number of books on nature and how the impact of nature on a child's health and the impact of being in nature. Because if a child is in nature and they're familiar with it, they're going to want to save it. And this is one of the things that I think is really important with young children is to get them exposed to natural areas, bring them into nature so that they have more identity with it and they can relax and say, oh yeah, we want this to be around for a while. And then the other part of it is by introducing ideas to them in the format that suits that age level, they also kind of get their parents involved. There were several things on recent talks that of policymakers and CEOs of big companies, their young children would come home to them and say, what are you doing about this, Dad? This is my planet. And it's why that company got involved because a child, one of their children came up and said, hey, are you doing something about this? So all these things, there's a rule in marketing that if you have to expose somebody at least 9 times to an idea before they do something about it or get interested in it. So we come at it from all sides. And we don't know the long-term benefits in that regard, but there is a lot of work that's been done about ADD, for example, that spending more time in nature actually does have some benefits for children with ADD. So.
Thank you, Susan. This is such a huge topic. It's amazing that you could edit it to this 1 hour. But I would really the 5 items that we
In the future, we can do that. The other thing that's not included on that list is that's more related to energy itself in your home. But you can also think in terms of the plantings, like the native plants, trees, and so on. And if you don't have a land with your home, you can work on a community garden or try to get your neighbors involved in doing something. There's a fellow this is a TED Talk you can look up sometime too. There's a fellow in LA, it's called Guerrilla Gardening. And he started planting vegetable crops in the parkway in the city and letting the vegetables be available to whoever wanted them. And at first the city was, no, you can't do that. But then it's become quite a movement in parts of LA.
Externalities and you know anything about internal, like taking externalities and incorporating, because so much of the way we do things economically ignores or pushes aside the environmental impact. And one of the things I think about a lot is, incorporating those ideas into the cost benefit analysis. Any words on that?
Yes, there's a whole, now it's called trying to incorporate the ecosystem services within a cost benefit analysis. Like normally a lumber company will just say, well, what does it cost us to get the lumber out of there? Well, you're not incorporating what it costs to leave the trees, what it's costing to the not just the trees themselves, but the soil. If you've read about trees, how they connect with each other, and the fungal system that connects the tree roots, how they feed each other and help each other. So that when you, in fact, Doug Ptolemy talks about planting trees closer together than you think you ought to try to start developing that kind of a network. So it is something. And one of the things which I didn't include in here because it was going to be long enough already is the whole idea of change. We're really on a precipice where we have to change our whole economic system. We can't be an extractive economy anymore because there's not enough. We don't have things out. I mean, maybe they'll get to Mars, but I don't think that's going to bring stuff back for us to use here. But we need to change to be more of a regenerative economy, like a regenerative agriculture. We think in terms of how can we base our economy not on take things out, make them into something, sell them, add stuff to your closet. We need to change that too.
How about a round of applause for
One more quick thing.
Yeah.
Today is Endangered Species Day. And the Land Conservancy this morning has a come plant native plants to help bring back our endangered species here in PB, like the Palos Verdes blue butterfly and the California gnatcatcher. So I just thought that kind of tied in with having it be today. It's unfortunately this morning, so I'm not going to get on it.
Right, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for all for coming. Next week, I'm going to do a talk about sort of the philosophical history of our relationship to the planet, which will lead to much of what Susan has said today. And following weeks, green death, and then a break. And then on the 18th, we're going to do a piece on monitoring the Earth from with different technologies. So thank you so much, Susan. So good. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you.
Really?
With the microphone.
TED Talk again that you were telling me about. The one that I can present to our homeowners.
I would say look up, let me look it up. Why don't you give me your email? Do you have an email?
I sure do. Thank you. Gosh, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much.